What's up, y'all? Nefertiti the Corny Rainbow, and today I have a sew along for you guys. I'm gonna be sewing up my new fall Nomi pattern 2006. It's a double-breasted tuxedo dress, and I can't wait to rock this pattern all fall and winter. What I love about my pattern is that you can wear it so many different ways. You can wear it as a jacket, really casual with some tennis shoes, or you can dress it up with some pumps and boots. It's really fun and versatile, and I hope that you guys enjoy it. Let's get started. So for this sew along, I'm going to be doing view A, and I'm going to use the shorter length on view B. So if you turn your pattern over to the back, you can see some suggested fabrics that you can use. For today's sew along, I'm going to be using a denim fabric that has a nice weight to it. Some optional things that you could do with this pattern is to add a single fold bias binding to all of your inseams. If you choose not to do that, you can always just serge your raw edges. You're also going to need 6 5/8 of an inch buttons and interfacing. This pattern does not call for a lining, so you don't have to worry about that. But if that's something that you would like to add to the pattern, you can feel free to do so. The pattern pieces that you're going to need for today's sew along are pattern piece number 7, which is the upper collar. You're going to cut 1 on the fold of fabric and also of interfacing. Pattern piece number 8, which is your under collar, and you're going to cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 3, which is the side front, and you're going to cut 2 of fabric. Pattern piece number 4, we're going to cut 2 of fabric. This is your side back. Pattern piece number 6, you're going to cut 4 of fabric. This is your pocket. Pattern piece number 1, for all views, you're going to cut 2 of fabric. If you are cutting view B, you would lengthen or shorten at the lengthen or shorten line here, and it does also say cut here for view B. Pattern piece number 2, this is your back. You're going to cut 1 on the fold. If you're cutting view B, you're going to shorten the pattern as well. Pattern piece number 5, this is your skirt front and back. You're going to need to cut 4 of this pattern piece. Pattern piece number 10, this is your sleeve. You're going to cut 2 of fabric. And lastly, pattern piece number 9, this is your front facing for all views. You're going to need to cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. If you're sewing view B, you want to make sure to shorten your pattern as well. Go ahead and cut out all your pattern pieces. Make sure you transfer all your markings, your buttonholes, and your dots and notches, and meet me back here. All right, y'all, so to get started, you're gonna wanna make sure that you stay stitch the side edges of pattern piece number 1, which is your front piece, and pattern piece number 2, which is your back piece. So as you can see here, I've stay stitched the neck edge and the side edge to your dot. For pattern piece number 2, you're going to stay stitch the side edges and also the neck edge. After you have stay stitched pattern piece number 1 and pattern piece number 2, you're going to pull out pattern piece number 3 and 4, and you're going to attach at the side seams. So let's go ahead and pin that. All right, you're going to do that for both pieces. Head on over to the machine and come back. All right, so I went ahead and added bias binding to the seam allowance on the side front and the side back. This is optional, and you can also choose to serge your raw edges instead of using the bias binding. After you've done that, we're going to put this one to the side and we're going to work on our skirt. All right, so next you're going to grab pattern piece number 5 and pattern piece number 6, which is your skirt front and back and your pockets. We're going to sew 1 pocket to the front of the skirt and 1 pocket to the back of the skirt at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. All right, you should have all 4 skirt front and back pattern pieces with your pockets pinned. We're gonna go ahead and stitch 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and meet me back here. All right, once you've sewn your pockets on, you're gonna go ahead and give them a nice press towards the pocket. Then we're gonna close this pocket off by stitching in between the first dot here, leaving an opening in between the 2 dots, and then picking back up on the next dot all the way down to the end of the skirt. And then we're gonna close the pocket off. All right, you're gonna do that for both skirt pieces. Let's head to the machine and stitch everything down. So first we're gonna stitch from the first dot and then we're gonna stop. We're gonna move to our next dot and we're gonna stitch 5/8 of an inch. All right, so at this point, if you are doing bias binding, you're gonna wanna go ahead and add your bias binding to your seam allowance. For your pocket, I'm going to go ahead and trim. And you can add your bias binding to both edges here and around your pocket, or you can go ahead and serge your raw edges. All right, now we're going to do our widest stitch, and we're going to go ahead and do our gathering stitches on the top edge of the skirt front and back. I'm going to stitch the first row at about 3/8 of an inch. And I'm not going to back stitch here. And we're going to add our second row of stitching. Then we're going to flip our pocket and we're going to start at the next dot. All right, now that you have added your gathering stitches and closed off your pocket and finished your skirt side seams, we're gonna go ahead and gather our top edge. So grab your side front and side back. Now, the way that you can tell which is the front side has 1 notch and the back side has 2 notches. We're gonna match up our seams first. Just make sure that your gathering is even. So once you get your gathering where you need it, go ahead and tie it off and finish pinning. So I have everything pinned. There are 3 dots on the top edge of this gathered skirt. So 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Stop at the pocket, flip your pocket out of the way, stitch at this next dot, back stitch to this last dot, and we're gonna back stitch Then we're gonna flip our pocket to the front side of the skirt. So you wanna make sure that we're gonna base down our pocket to the same side of the side front pattern piece with the single notch, all right? So let's head to the machine, do that, and come back. All right, y'all, so if you flip your garment over to the right side, you'll see your seams are matching up really nicely. Your pocket should match up with this side seam for your side, front, and back pieces. Go ahead, give this a nice press. You're gonna press your seam allowance towards the bodice. Everything that we've done here, we're gonna do the same exact thing to our other skirt, front and back, and our side, front and back. Do that, come back, and we'll move on to the next step. Next, we're gonna be working with our front and back piece. We're gonna go ahead and attach our front piece and back piece together at the shoulder seams. All right, so I went ahead and pinned the right front and the right back to the side back and the side back skirt and the front side and the front skirt. What we're gonna do is we're gonna sew 5/8 of an inch seam allowance until we get to our first dot. We're gonna fold that seam allowance up and we're gonna start at our next dot and stitch down the edge of the skirt. We're gonna do the same thing on both sides, starting and stopping at all of our dots. We're gonna sew our shoulder seams at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're gonna sew the front piece to our side front at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We have come up on our first dot, so we're gonna stitch until we get to that first dot, making sure to not go past, and we're going to back stitch and push that seam forward. Now I'm going to push this seam up and we're going to stitch down the rest of the skirt. You can see I pulled this seam out of the way as well, and we're going to start right at that dot. All right, so if we take a closer look at this seam, we have a perfect point right where our dots are meeting. So you're gonna do that for your left side. All right, I've given everything a good press. I went ahead and finished all of the remaining bias binding seam allowances, and we're gonna go ahead and put this to the side, and we're gonna move on to our under collar and our collar. So you should have pattern piece number 7, your upper collar, and pattern piece number 8, which is your under collar. So for pattern piece number 8, you're going to need to stitch the seams together, and I went ahead and already did that. Make sure that you transfer all of your notches and your pattern markings, your dots, and I went ahead and on pattern piece number 7, your upper collar, I stitched 5/8 of an inch on the top edge. You should also have 2 dots, and I went ahead and trimmed right just above that stay stitch. So we're gonna fold this down 5/8 of an inch, and then we're going to trim 1/4 of an inch. All right. So you're gonna place your upper collar and your under collar together, right sides together. And we're gonna stitch from the large dot on the side edge to the small dot, all the way on the top edge where you have double notches. Match that up, sew it up, come back, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, so we went ahead and we stitched the undercollar at the top edge. Now we're gonna go ahead and trim this down. I also went ahead and understitched everything, the seam allowance down to your undercollar here. So as far as you can go, you wanna make sure you understitch there as well. All right, so we're gonna trim our corners, trim everything down, trim off the excess. All right, so now we're gonna turn this right side out. Got my point turner. All right, let's give this a good press and come back. All right, so I gave the collar a good press. Now we're ready to attach the collar to our dress. All right, so now I'm matching up the collar to the neck edge, and you should have markings on your collar as well as your seam allowance for your shoulder on your neck. So you're gonna match up the seam allowances first. Make sure your center back is lining up. And you want to be sure not to stitch this opening that we folded down 5/8 of an inch, but we are going to be stitching the remainder of the collar to the neck edge. So match up your notches. And if you need to make any clippings for curves, go ahead and do so. We've already stay stitched the neck edge. There also will be a dot that we're going to stop at, and you should have transferred that marking as well, and that will be the edge of your collar. All right, so go ahead and go to your machine. We're going to stitch this at 5/8 of an inch, and we're basting, leaving this opening here. You're not going to catch your upper collar, but you are going to stitch down your under collar, okay? So you're stitching here, but be sure not to catch this opening, all right? Once you've done that, we'll move on to the next step. All right, now that your collar is attached, we're gonna go ahead and we're going to add our front facing. I went ahead and I finished the facing edge. So you wanna make sure that you either serge your edges or finish them off, or you can add the bias binding like I have. So we're gonna match up our notches. Make sure that you're matching all your dots as well. And I'm gonna turn the collar down. You wanna make sure that you're matching up your dot here. You should also have a notch from your neck edge. We're gonna match that notch up as well. Your edge of your front facing should match up with your seam on your shoulder. Also on the shoulder seam, you should have pressed under 5/8 of an inch. All right, so we're gonna do the same exact thing to the other side. Go ahead and stitch around your neck edge and on the edge of your front facing and come back. All right, so now that we've stitched the front facing together, we're gonna understitch the front facing, making sure that you're catching your seam allowance on your front facing only. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you're understitching just about 3 inches below your upper buttonhole marking. So what I've done is I've taken a pin and I've placed it where my upper buttonhole marking is, and I'm going to start a little bit below that for my understitching. want to make sure that your seam allowance is going towards your facing. All right, so we also have to understitch from the corner to 3 inches from our notches here. So I'm gonna go ahead and measure 3 inches from the notches and just put a pin on the side that is interfaced. So for this understitch, we're gonna push our seam allowance towards our front piece. Go as far as we can. So I was able to go about 2 inches before the corner there. So do that to the other side as well. All right, so now we're gonna trim off our corners and where we understitched, and we're also gonna trim around our neck edge. All right, now that we have everything trimmed, let's go ahead and turn our corners out. All right, with right sides together, we're gonna stitch our facing to our front piece at our edge here at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that on both sides and come back. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and trim the excess. All right, now you're gonna turn your corners out. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do is slip stitch this pressed edge of our collar over the neck seam. And then we're going to hand tag this facing over our shoulder seam and give everything a good press. Come back and we'll move on to the next step. All right, y'all, so I've given this a really good press and we're gonna move on to your sleeves. If you're doing view B, you can go ahead and attach your bias binding with right sides together and you can follow the pattern instructions for that portion. Next, we're going to be working on our sleeve. You're going to want to go ahead and ease stitch around the top edge of your sleeve. I've already done so. We're going to pin and sew 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so you're going to take both of your sleeves to the machine and sew 5/8 of an inch seam allowance for both and go ahead and hem your sleeves. All right, so I went ahead and finished up my sleeve. All right, with these gathering stitches, we're going to go ahead and form our sleeve. All right, once you start to get that shape there, we're gonna go ahead and attach our sleeve to our dress. So with right sides together, we're gonna match our sleeves up. You should have 3 dots. So one at the shoulder seam and then 2 on the side. You want to make sure that you match those up as well. Go ahead and stitch your armhole at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then you're going to go and stitch 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, you guys, we are all done. The only thing you have to do is add your buttons and your buttonholes, hem your bottom, and give everything a good press. All right, y'all, you have completed my fall tuxedo dress, Nomi 2006. I hope you enjoyed this sew along. Please be sure and tag at Nomi Patterns with all of your makes and also at the Corny Rainbow and at Mimi G Style. Until next time, peace.